What is the Sonus Medius? What is this magical, mystical, enigmatic sound that is supposedly such an important part of classical Latin pronunciation? Should we be saying optumus instead of optimus? Let's find out together. I'm Luke, and this is polýMATHY. A really important way to understand the pronunciation of classical Latin is to read what the ancient Roman grammarians said. And how do you learn how to read Latin? Well, you should take advantage of this video sponsor, the Ancient Language Institute. The goal of the courses at Ancient Language Institute is not just to teach you grammar and things like that, but to teach you how to become a fluent reader in Latin. Oh, you'll learn all the grammar, but you'll get to do it in an interesting, active, stimulating way with teachers who can actually speak Latin fluently. And we'll be showing you how to respond in Latin from the very first day. This method is called the direct method. You get the context, the whole situation, the scene, the vocabulary, everything you need to know to understand what's going on, and then you get to understand all the finer grammatical points. Input-based methods have been proven to be some of the best ways to acquire another language, and that goes for modern languages as well as ancient ones. After a year of study with AOLI, you'll be able to read Virgil and Ovid, the very foundation of classical Latin. And not just classical Latin, but also Augustine's Confessions, because naturally you only need to learn one kind of Latin to be able to read all of the kinds of Latin. Whether your interests are Renaissance or medieval or classical, one Latin course is all you need to get started. Registration for the spring semester is coming pretty soon on December 16th. And guess what? Not just Latin, but for the spring semester, you can learn Ancient Greek or Old English or even Biblical Hebrew. So 4 languages to choose from. Learning ancient languages has been one of the most amazing and fulfilling parts of my life, and I know it will be for you too. So definitely go to ancientlanguage.com today and see the courses they have, including ones that are available for intermediate as well as advanced. It's amazing when dead languages become alive again in your own life and experience. And that's why I'm just so interested in this subject. How was Latin pronounced 2,000 years ago, and maybe even 2,100 years ago, or 1,900 years ago, because it's a little bit different. Well, let's talk, in fact, about one of these really interesting sound changes that occurred in the Latin language, and that's about this Sonus Medius. What is this? Well, ancient grammarians discuss this sound. The earliest really explicit commentary is from Quintilian in the 1st century AD, who said that the older spellings like optumus were changed to optimus, especially under the recommendations of Julius Caesar. I've heard of that guy, but who knew that he also wrote a book on grammar, which has sadly been lost to time. Isn't that terrible? We don't have his book, but in it, evidently, Julius Caesar recommended that this vowel that is written optumus, facilumus. Here, let me get a good list of a bunch of them. This is, of course, is Vox Latina by the famous Sidney Allen. Link to Amazon is in the description. And some of the important ones include optimus, māxumus. That's fun. Septumus, tegumentum, documentum, facilume, lacrima, aucupium, surrupuit, manuplares, manubiae, pontifex, manifestus. And these all obviously became, in writing, optimus, maximus, septimus, tegimentum, documentum, facilime, lacrima, aucipium, surripuit, maniblares, manibiae, pontifex, manifestus, etc. So, why on earth is there a confusion here? What is this? Well, Quintilian actually tells us, medius est quidam u et I literae sonus, non enin sic optimum dicimus ut opiumum. That is the pure sound, if you will, of opiumum. That's not the same sound that's in optimus. It's very interesting. So even though it's written optimus, what is this sound? If it was written with a U before, in fact, he literally says it's between letter U and letter I. It's between U and E. Well, that's fascinating. What could be between those two sounds? Well, let's go to the IPA vowel chart and see if we can think about this a second. So, literally, right between the U and the E, these are high vowels, a high front unrounded vowel and a high back rounded vowel. Well, we have two options. One's rounded and one is not. Starting from the back and going forward, ooh, 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 ooh. Something like that, ooh. And then unrounded would be ooh, ooh, ooh. This is actually a vowel that occurs in Slavic languages like Ukrainian and Russian, ooh. And that's unrounded. So ooh, ooh, something in there perhaps could be the Sonus Medius. Now, what could be causing that? Well, if we think of the list that I just rattled off there, what kind of consonant is always next to the questionable vowel, the dubious vowel? And that is always, in every one of these examples, it's always a labial consonant, an M or a P or a B or an F, something involving the lips. The lips are, of course, the essential organ that rounds vowels into an U shape, for example, right? So instead of something like optimus, optumus. So the labial consonant is clearly having a very important effect on the vowel sound here, creating a sort of confusion. But that's not the only confusion, because if we look at these, māxumus, septumus, tegumentum, documentum, pontifex, manifestus, normally these are places that aren't stressed, especially in Old Latin. In Old Latin, the stress accent regularly occurred on the first syllable. So if the U or E of this questionable vowel, this dubious vowel, this sonus medius, if this dubious vowel isn't on a stressed syllable, at least in Old Latin, then it can, in fact, occur, especially in this intermediary position like māximus, optumus. It's not the final one, it's not the initial, but it's in between. There's even an inscription from 117 BC where there's infimo next to infumum, or written like that. So probably we have a sound that is indeed quite intermediate. Another possibility, a sound that's kind of intermediate in a way, is the U of ancient Greek, especially of the contemporary Hellenistic and Roman Koine Greek, this U sound. That's why the Romans, of course, brought in the U letter, that letter Y, as we call it. But note that the letter Y doesn't get used to represent this sound, even though it was a part of the alphabet, even though the Romans had also, in some of their own native words, added aspiration, like triumphus. They had borrowed Greek letters quite readily for a lot of different purposes, even in native words, but they didn't use the U of Greek, of contemporary Greek, to represent this sound. So it probably wasn't U. Why? Well, because the U sound is a front rounded vowel we see here on the IPA chart. So a front rounded vowel, it's the same as E, just rounded, U. It's a possible way to pronounce this sound. We even see it in medieval spellings like lacrima, but the Y gets used all the time for an E, simply because they had the same sound in medieval Latin most of the time. And thus spelling confusions were common and the letter Y looked cool. So a pronunciation like optimus or māximus is probably, it's fine if you want to, but I don't think it's the most likely sound for this. Ooh, ooh. So it's going to be one of those. Ooh, probably. If we want to do this sonus medius, the Romans called it sonus medius. It sounds like almost a pretty good, just by chance, description on the IPA vowel chart. And that's the best explanation. So in a word that's spelled optumus, that is in the more archaic spelling, if we want to assume this is representative of the pronunciation, most likely this is actually not optumus, but optumus, optumus. And it's such a hesitated sound, it's not a schwa, and such a short sound that you don't really hardly notice it. Optimus, optimus. How do you represent that? Optimus. I have the rounding, it's centralized. Optimus, it's high, but it's not, it's not optimus, it's optimus, optimus. It's in between those. Cicero said that the sound was actually already associated with more rustic speech, like it sounded more old-fashioned. And that means we're getting closer to the E sound in classical Latin. In Caesar's day, so middle of the 1st century BC, that's the classical Latin century. That's the beginning of it. That's the core of it. Thus, sure, a more archaic pronunciation, optimus, is fine, but probably we should be going more towards the vowel E. But even in the 1st century AD, Quintilian says it's not quite either one of these sounds. So Therefore, the change from optumus is probably going to more unrounded optimus, optimus, optimus. And also, due to the incidentals of vowel harmony that can occur, perhaps the final vowel has an effect as well. For example, optumus, maybe a little bit more rounded, and then in the, say, the plural or the genitive singular, optimi, optimus, optimi, and that vowel, that sonus medius, might have even been affected by the vowels around it. I mean, it's affected by the consonants around it, and vowel harmony does sometimes occur in these phonetic kind of ways. So what should you do when you recite Latin? Well, the very fact that the ancient Romans were saying, hey, it's not really an U anymore, it's more like an E, but not quite an E, this certainly excuses us to use an E sound, optimus, maximus. There also seems to be an actual split of the sonus medius, where we have both artibus and artubus. Artibus is ars, meaning skill, and artubus is artus, meaning joint. We would expect the vowels to merge here, and maybe they were completely merged in an earlier stage, but in the standard spelling of Latin, and therefore probably in the standard pronunciation of classical Latin, as it was back in the day, the ancient Romans tried to separate these in pronunciation for the sake of clarity, because if it's artubus, we know it's about the joints of the finger or the arms or something, whereas if it's artibus, we know it's about skills. Similarly, the U spelling also prevailed in words like documentum and tegumentum, where the E spelling was totally fine, yet the older spelling became codified into what we think of as standard Latin orthography. This seems to indicate that as the sonus medius in general was unrounding from U to U, and possibly even fronting towards E, that the other examples that were retained, like artubus and documentum, that they actually were probably also being backed. Artubus contrasted with artibus in pronunciation, not just in spelling, and the same for documentum next to septimus. So this seems to indicate to us that those beautiful 3 centuries that we call the period of classical Latin, that a lot of possibilities exist for expressing the sonus medius in an authentic way. And I'm not going to prescribe any of these options necessarily, especially since we are observing a vowel change in this very sound during the classical period. So have fun with these possibilities. This was a sound in transition in the 1st century BC. In the classical period. And because of where it's placed in this position in between these kinds of consonants, it was probably very short, rather indistinct, and hence the dubiousness of the vowel, the uncertainty of the ancient Romans and exactly how to spell it. But most likely, given the records we have, this was a pronunciation in transition from more oo to and yet it would never have been stressed. You would never hear it that clearly. It would sound like optimus, maximus. And if you prefer to do the nice pure vowel, doing optimus, maximus, that sounds fine. But I noticed that just speaking Latin quickly sometimes, having that bilabial consonant right nearby the M or the P, like an optimus, maximus, has an effect on that vowel for me when I speak that. I like that somewhat kind of reduced vowel, so not quite on the edges of the vowel chart, if you will. So that's how I feel about the sonus medius. I hope that was a sufficiently clear explanation about what I know. Obviously, you can check out Vox Latina if you want to see exactly what Sidney Allen says about the matter. But if you have any questions on this, do let me know. And if you want to learn Latin fluently, check out ancientlanguage.com. Ancient Language Institute is one of the best places to acquire the Latin language, and Hebrew, and Old English, and Ancient Greek. So thank you very much. Gratias wobi sago, and thanks to each and every one of my Patreon supporters. Walete.